All right, number one. According to OL, which choice completes the text with the most logical, precise word or phrase? And when you do these, write in the word you think would go in the blank without even reading A, B, C, or D. This will give you a good idea of what naturally you feel like should fit in that, and that should be a good indicator of what the right answer choice is. So, according to botanists, a viburnum plant experienced insect damage that may develop erinium, a discolored felty growth on its leaf blades. A blank viburnum plant, on the other hand, will have leaves with smooth surfaces and uniformly green coloration. What's a healthy? A healthy plant. So this is basically a sick plant. This is insect damage that may develop erinium, and that's the felty growth on leaf blades. But blank, a healthy plant will have smooth surfaces and uniformly green coloration. Oh my God. I swear to God, guys, I didn't even mean to do that. Look at that. That's why this trick is so powerful. You literally can guess the right word. Look at that. But, anywho's, well, let's look through. A struggling plant will have leaves with smooth surfaces and uniformly green coloration. No, because the struggling plant is this one. This is going to be the plant without the insect damage. A beneficial viburnum plant, on the other hand, I don't really know. I think that's improper use of beneficial. It's not really benefiting anything. It's just its current state. It's not affecting other things. So, no. And a simple plant, on the other hand, no, because it's not nothing implies simple. It very much implies healthy because it's different from that. So this part is going to be the opposite of this, and this is an unhealthy, sick plant, and this would be a healthy one. So D is the best answer for number one. And number two, which choice completes the text with the most logical, precise word or phrase? All right, so we're going to fill in this spot with a word that we think it should be. Nigerian American author Teju Cole's blank his two passions, photography and written word, culminates in his 2017 book Blind Spot, which evocatively combines his original photographs with from his travels with his poetic prose. So I'm going to say combines. So he combines his two passions, photography and written word, and this is through his book that has photographs and poetic prose. So let's look at the answer choices. Which indifference to? It doesn't seem indifferent because you're not really indifferent to passions. That makes no sense. Enthusiasm for, you have enthusiasm for your passions. That checks out. It would make sense that combines his Nigerian author enthusiasm for his two passions. You know, the two Cole's enthusiasm for two passions culminates in his 2017 book. Yeah, that makes sense. Concern about his two passions. I don't think that's best. It doesn't really express anywhere that he's concerned with anything. And then surprise at his two passions. No, because what would be surprising about his two passions? He wrote the book. Oh, yeah, D doesn't make any sense. B is absolutely the correct answer choice here. Number three, which choice completes the text with the most logical, precise word or phrase? So let's read it. Novelist N.K. Jemisin declines to blank the conventions of science fiction genre in which she writes. She has suggested that her readers appreciate her work precisely because of this willingness. All right, this is our hint to thwart expectations. So this is what she's doing and avoid formulaic plots and themes. Declines to, I think, adhere. You could read that. That's adhere. To adhere the conventions. Okay, I mean, be to adhere to the conventions of science fiction genre in which she writes. She's clearly not following them because she's thwarting expectations. These expectations are the conventions of science fiction genre. And one of the reasons is that she describes it as formulaic plots and themes. So she's doing the opposite of what most people do. So let's look. Declines to question. She doesn't decline to question it. That makes no sense. It would make sense saying she questions the conventions, but she does not decline to question. So, no. Declines to react to the conventions? No, because she's not reacting to them. She's going against them. She's writing against them. She's not expressing her opinion. This is an action. So, B's out. She declines to perceive the conventions of the science fiction genre. No. Because once again, that's similar to react to, where it doesn't really imply that she's having an opinion over it, perceive them. She definitely perceives them. She perceives them as formulaic plots and themes, so C's out. And then D, conform to. That's going to be our correct answer here. That's the most close one to adhere to, conform to. She declines to conform to the conventions, meaning she doesn't follow the conventions. She does not do what everybody else does, and that's why she's suggesting that her readers appreciate her work because she thwarts the expectations. So D is the correct answer here. All right, number 4. This is going to be a which choice completes the text with the most logical word or phrase. Oh my goodness. There we go. In Nature Poem 2017, Tommy Pico portrays his blank the natural world by honoring the centrality of nature within his tribe's traditional beliefs while simultaneously expressing his distaste for being in wilderness settings himself. Okay, so what he's doing is he honors the centrality of nature, but he also does not like nature because he does not like being in the wilderness settings himself. So, what would I put in that blank? Portrays his, I guess, mixed, contradicting feelings, his contradicting views, I guess, of his contradicting views of the natural world because he honors the centrality of nature while expressing his distaste at the same time. Yeah, I like that. Let's go with that. So let's look at the answer choices. Responsiveness too? Well, no, because he's not really responding to the natural world. He's expressing his ideas over it, which is the centrality of nature and his feelings of distaste over it. He's not really responding to anything. So no. So we have ambivalence. Okay, that's very likely it. Ambivalence means mixed feelings. You don't really know whether you like something or not. There's some positives, there's some negatives. That's more what ambivalence means. And that also fits with contradicting. So you have mixed feelings. You have, well, I kind of like it, but I kind of don't. Those views may contradict each other. They don't have to, but it is very similar to contradicting views, and it is expressed with his centrality of nature and distaste for wilderness. So B is a likely answer. Renunciation of? No, because this means more like he's rejecting nature, but that's not the purpose. The purpose isn't that he's rejecting nature. It's the duality between his tribal views, so centrality in nature, and then his personal views, which is distaste in wilderness. So he's not rejecting it. He's more talking about how his views are diverse and contradicting. Once again, leading us back to ambivalence and then mastery over no, because nowhere does it say he has mastery over the natural world by honoring the centrality in nature. Nah, he doesn't have. That's not what it's implying. B is very much the likely answer for number 4. All right, number 15. Which choice best states the main purpose of the text? All right, let's read it. Following the text in the 1924 poem Cycle, that could be a hint, who was citizen of the Confederate Silesian Kootenai tribes. Okay, that could also be a hint. So let's read it. There shall be new roads wending, a new beating of the drum. Men's eyes shall have fresh seeing, gray lives reprise their span. But under the new sun's being, completing what night began. There shall be the same backs bending, the same feet shall drum, the same sad feet shall drum. When this night finds its ending, a day shall have come. The main purpose of the text. Well, reading it, I see that this is positive. There should be new roads, new beating of the drum, fresh seeing, new suns began, completing what night began. But they also mention that there's at the same time, there's all going to be this new stuff, but you're going to have the same backs bending and the same sad feet shall drum. There's bad stuff too. So that's what I really see here. But let's look at the answer choices. To consider how the repetitiveness inherent in human life could be both rewarding and challenging, maybe. I don't think it's bad necessarily because it talks about how it is repetitive. So you can see the repetition here. So beating of the drum, same sad feet shall drum. It is repetitive, and it's talking about a cycle, and it looks like it's talking about the cycle is referring to days because you see night and day. So yeah, if it's talking about a cycle, night and day is a cycle. It's repetitive because it mentions drumming, the same backs bending, the same sad feet shall drum. You know what? The more I read about it, the more A's looking good. You know what? We'll take out this question mark. We're going to give it a check. To question whether activities completed at one time of day are more memorable than those completed at another time of day. Nah, it doesn't really talk about what's memorable and what's not. It doesn't really. It mentions the time of day, I guess. That's why it would be tricky, is because it mentions nighttime and sunrise, but it doesn't talk about how these activities are more memorable at some point than the other. So, B's out. To refute the idea that joy is more commonly experienced emotion than sadness is, I don't think so. It doesn't really talk about joy. It talks about sadness. I think that's maybe why it's a tricky question. I think it's more contrasting. What's that feeling you get when you know tomorrow's going to be a good day? Yeah, it's hope. It's talking more about hope than joy. It's not really talking about how fun anything is or how good you feel. So C's out, but I can see why that was tricky. And then D, to demonstrate how the experiences of individuals relate to the experiences of their communities. No, it doesn't really mention like individual versus community anywhere in the text. I think A is the best answer for number five. All right, number six. Let's look, and it's going to be a main idea question. What is the main purpose of the text? So, the following text is adapted from Jane Austen's 1814 novel Mansfield Park. Speaker's Tom, and he's considering staging a play at home with a group of his friends and family. We mean nothing but a little amusement among ourselves, just to vary the scene, and exercise our powers in something new. We want no audience, no publicity. We may be trusted, I think, in choosing some play most perfectly unexceptionable, and I can conceive no greater harm or danger to any of us in conversing in the elegant written language of some respectable author than in chattering in words of our own. All right, so what do I think is the main purpose? It's really just talking about the play he wants to do, and he's talking that we just want a little bit of amusement, no audience, no publicity. We can be trusted in making a play most perfectly unexceptionable, meaning it's not supposed to be good. I think that's what he's saying. And I can conceive no greater harm or danger to any of us conversing in the elegant written language of some respectable author than in chattering. And we're not going to do some respectable author. That's dangerous. We should just do it in words of our own. So I think he's describing the play, maybe talking about what he thinks it's going to be like. So let's look at the main ideas. To offer Tom's assurance that the play will be inoffensive and involve only a small number of people. I like that one because he does talk about it. He's like, we mean nothing but little amusement among ourselves, no audience, no publicity, so few people. Yeah, so it's going to be perfectly unexceptionable, and it's going to be in the words of our own. It's going to be an inoffensive, small play. It's just going to be fun. This looks like it's him describing it to other people, so yeah, I like it. To clarify, the play will not be performed in the manner Tom has originally intended. No. One, I don't even know what he originally intended, but it seems that he's pretty set on performing the play exactly like how he describes. So B's out. C, to elaborate on the idea that people around Tom lack the skills to successfully stage a play. He's not saying that. I don't think he's making a comment on other people's skills. He's more just putting the low expectations that this is just going to be a fun play. We don't have to try too hard. It's just going to be something between us as friends and family. So, no, I don't think that's the purpose. He does mention it, so I can see why that's a trick question, but that's definitely not the purpose, is to tell them they all suck and can't make a play. No, it's not C. To assert that Tom believes the group performing the play will be able to successfully promote it, definitely not D, because right there, I mean, it says no audience or publicity, which is literally what promotion is. And he's saying we're not going to do that. So D is completely out, and A is the only answer choice we have left. All right, number seven. Which choice best describes the overall structure of the text? So we're just going to look at the flow of the text and how it's built. So let's read it. John Mitchell, who is also a painter, uses images she describes for her album covers to emphasize she creates for her album covers to emphasize the ideas expressed in her music. So this is what she does in general for the cover of her album, Turbulent Indigo. She paints a striking self portrait that resembles Vincent van Gogh's self portrait, bandaged. So this is evidence or an example. I'd say example because it's not proving a point. This is what she does. This is an example. The image calls attention to the album's title song, in which Mitchell sings about the legacy of the post Impressionist painter in that song. So this is kind of why she did that, explaining the example. In that song, Mitchell also hints that she feels a strong artistic connection to Van Gogh, and this is just more descriptive information, reinforced by her imagery on the cover. So this is what she does. She's a painter who uses images she creates for her album covers to emphasize ideas expressed in her music. Okay, so she's a musician and painter. This is who she is, and what she does. Here's an example: Turbulent Indigo, and she did a self portrait that looks like Vincent van Gogh, and then this is what that portrait meant to her, and overall, she likes Van Gogh. Okay, cool. Presents a claim about Mitchell and then gives an example supporting that claim. Hmm. I mean, like, yes, but also that's very non-descriptive. I don't know. I would look at the other answer choices before going that, but it's not wrong. She is a painter and a musician, and here's an example of her painting and being a musician. Discusses Van Gogh's influence on Mitchell, then considers Mitchell's influence on other artists now, and never discusses her influence on other artists throughout. It describes a similarity between two artists. Nope. Doesn't really talk about how she's similar to Van Gogh, just that Van Gogh influences her. So C's out. It describes the song's turbulent and explains. They don't even describe the songs at all. So A is the only answer. And A's a very bare bones answer. But once again, it does follow the claim of what she does. Here's an example. And then we're going to talk about Van Gogh. So A is going to be the right answer here. Number 8. So based on the text, how would P and X most likely characterize the conclusion presented in text 1? Okay, so how would people in text 2 characterize the conclusion presented in text 1? So we got to find the conclusion in text 1, and we got to find their opinion. And then using these two pieces of information, we can infer how they would characterize it. So, number 1, astronomer Mark Holland and colleagues examined white dwarfs, small, dense remnants of past stars, in order to determine the composition of exoplanets they used to orbit those stars, studying wavelengths of light, the white dwarf atmospheres. The team reported traces elements such as lithium and sodium. Cool. Support the presence of exoplanets with continental crust similar to Earth's. All right, so this right here is their claim, and their claim really is that traces of elements such as lithium and sodium support the presence of exoplanets with continental crusts similar to Earth. So we think there's going to be exoplanets with crusts similar to Earth's because of the lithium and sodium found in the white dwarf atmospheres. All right, let's look at text 2. Past studies of white dwarf atmospheres have concluded that certain exoplanets have a continental crust. Okay, it looks like it's supporting it. Geologist KP and astronomer SX argue that those studies, never mind, they're not going to support it. Those studies unduly emphasize the atmospheric traces of lithium and other individual elements as signifiers of the type of rock found on Earth. The studies don't adequately account. Okay, so they don't adequately account for different minerals made up of various ratios of those elements and the possibility of rocks types not found on Earth that contain those minerals. All right. A, as unexpected because it was widely believed at the time that the white dwarf exoplanets lacked continental crust. I don't think that's it. Because past studies of white dwarf atmospheres have concluded that certain exoplanets have continental crusts. Yeah. Yeah. This is just wrong because of this sentence here. As premature because researchers have only just begun trying to determine what kinds of crust white dwarf exoplanets had. That's also not true because, once again, past studies have concluded that certain exoplanets have continental crusts. It looks like there has been previous research because that's what they're actually commenting on is the fact that the studies unduly emphasize atmospheric traits of lithium and other individual elements as signifiers of the type of rock found on Earth. So this is implying that other people have done research on the types of rock found on Earth or signifiers, and that's not entirely accurate because of XYZ. So B's out. As questionable because it rests on an incomplete consideration of potential sources of the elements detected in white dwarf atmosphere. I like this one because it's a questionable, which makes sense because they don't adequately account for the different minerals made up of various ratios of those elements, possibly rocks not found on Earth that contain those minerals. So what they're doing is really questioning the past studies because what they're saying is if this star has lithium and sodium, therefore it has the rock that Earth has. And they're saying, well, there's rock that Earth doesn't have that are made up of lithium and sodium. So you can't really say they have the same crust as Earth. So yeah, I like C. And then as puzzling because it's unusual to successfully detect lithium and sodium when analyzing wavelengths of light. Nah, it doesn't really talk about the methodology or whether they actually detected lithium or sodium. It's not questioning that. They're questioning what it means to detect lithium and sodium. So C is going to be the correct answer for number 8. All right, number 9. According to the text, why are ecologists worried about Pando? Yeah, let's answer that question. Utah is home to Pando, a colony of about 47,000 Quaking aspen trees, and they all share a single root system. Pando is one of the largest single organisms by mass on Earth, but ecologists are worried that its growth is okay. So sweet, we found why it's worried. Growth is declined in part because of the grazing by animals. So their growth is declining because animals keep eating it. The ecologists say that strong fences could prevent deer from eating young trees and help pandos start thriving again. All right, sweet. It isn't growing at the same rate it used to. It's not the best because it's declining, so it could be A. B, it isn't producing young trees anymore. No, it's producing young trees. They're just getting eaten by deer. So B's out. It can't grow into new areas because it's blocked by fences. Nope, the fences were meant to actually save it. It says it right. Strong fences could keep the deer out from eating the young trees. Its root system can't support many new trees. No, definitely not that. It never mentioned how its root system is the issue. It mentioned that it's declining. So it's going to be A. And the evidence is that the growth is declining, which changing the rate from obviously increasing. So A is going to be the correct answer for number 9. Okay, number 10. According to the text, why was Wang and his team discovery of TX fossil significance? We're looking for the significance of the fossil discovery. For many years, the only existing fossil evidence of ME, an extinct family of large aquatic arthropods known as sea scorpions and related to modern arachnids and horseshoe crabs, came from 4 species living on the paleocontinent of Laurussia. Okay, so this could be a reason for the significance is that it's the only existing evidence of these lives on Laurussia. In a discovery that expands our understanding of the geographical distribution of mixopterids, paleontologist Bo Wang and others have identified fossilized remains of a new mixopterid species, TX, that lived over 400 million years ago on the paleocontinent of Gondwana. Okay, cool. So this is also why it's significant, is that it expands our understanding of the geographical distribution of mixopterids. Because basically what they're saying is they were only on Larissa, but he found them on Gondwana. And so the reason it's significant is now we know they actually lived in other places. So let's see. Fossil constitutes the first evidence found by scientists that mixopterids lived more than 400. Nope. Doesn't talk about the time date. It talks about where they were found. The fossil helps establish that mixopterids are more closely related to modern arachnids than and horseshoe crabs. No, it doesn't talk about how they're related. Once again, it's talking about the location. Fossil helped establish more accurate timeline of the evolution of mixopterids on the paleocontinents of Larissa and Gondwana. I'm going to say no to that one because once again, we're not talking about the evolution. We're talking about where they were. Fossil constitutes the first evidence found by scientists that mixoporids existed outside of the paleocontinent Laurussia. D is a much more likely answer. It mentions that because the big part of this was they were originally found on Laurussia. He found them on Gondwana. What does that mean? It means that they don't only exist on Laurussia. So D is going to be the correct answer because it's also the only one that mentions where they were found, not the inferences made. So D is the correct answer. Number 11. Which finding, if true, would support the scholar's claim? So we need to find the scholar's claim and then find A, B, C, or D that supports it. So let's look. The novelist Toni Morrison was the first black woman to work as an editor for the publishing company Random House from 67 to 83. His scholar asserts that one of Morrison's likely aims during her time. Okay, so this looks a lot like it's going to be set up as a claim. One of Morrison's likely aims during her time as an editor was to strengthen the presence of black writers on the list of Random House's published authors. So this is the claim, and that's she supports presence of black writers on the Random House's published authors. So let's go find evidence for that. Percentage of authors published by Random House who were black rose in the early 70s and stabilized throughout the decade. It's not the best. It doesn't really directly talk about Toni Morrison, but it's not. There could be worse answers out there, so let's leave it. Black authors who were interviewed in the 1980s and 1990s were highly likely to cite Toni Morrison's novels as principal influence on their work. No, I don't think that's going to be it because it doesn't really talk about her direct effect on pudding. Because I think what it's implying is her position, she was going to publish more black authors during her time, and that doesn't really say it. It just kind of mentions that after the fact, her influence affected them. And it talks about her novels, not her position at the publishing company Random House. C. The novels written by Toni Morrison that were published after 1983 sold significantly more copies and received a wider critical acclaim than the novels she wrote before 1983. Now, once again, this doesn't talk about her influence for black writers or her time at the publishing house, just that 1983 was a significant year for her novels. Works that were edited by Toni Morrison during her time at Random House displayed stylistic characteristics that distinguished them from works that were not edited by Morrison. Now, that doesn't talk about her influence on black writers. So I'm going to say it's A. That was the one I didn't mark off, but it is the right answer because it talks about that while she worked there, the percentage of authors that were black rose and it stabilized throughout the decade, but it did rise. This does support her claim that she wanted to strengthen the presence of black writers on the list of Random House's published authors. And you can see that because during the time she worked there, the amount of authors that were published by Random House increased. So A is going to be the correct answer here. All right, number 12. Which quotation from the translation The Poet Walt Whitman most effectively illustrates the claim? All right, well, let's go find the claim. Poet Walt Whitman in an 1887 essay by Jose Marti, a Cuban author and political activist, originally written in Spanish. In the essay, Martin explores the value of literature, arguing that, all right, well, we found the claim, arguing that a society's spiritual well being depends on the character of its literary culture. So that's his claim. Let's go find the translation that illustrates that claim. Poetry, which brings together or separates, which fortifies or brings anguish, which shores up or demolishes souls, which gives or robs men of faith and vigor, is more necessary to a people than industry itself. For industry provides them with the means of substance, while literature gives them the desire and strength for life. I like this one because it talks about how it can bring together or separate. It can fortify or anguish, shores up or demolishes souls, the influence that poetry has on a society's spiritual well being, because that's the claim over here. So I like A. Every society brings literature its own form of expression, and the history of nations can be told with greater truth by the stages of literature than by chronicles of decades. I also like this one because it talks about how literature can affect society because you can see as society's transition go up or down, you can see that reflected in literature. So B's good. Where will a race of men go when they have lost the habit of thinking about faith and the scope and meaning of their actions? The best among them, those who consecrate nature with their sacred desire for the future, will lose, in a sordid and painful annihilation, all stimulus to alleviate the ugliest. I don't like that one. That one doesn't really talk about literary's effect on society's spiritual well being, so I'm not going to support that one. It just talks about where will people go if they don't have faith, which doesn't support the claim or is relevant to it. D. Listen to the song of this hardworking and satisfied nation. Listen to Walt Whitman. The exercise of himself exalts him to majesty. Tolerance exalts him to justice, order, joy. Now, this doesn't once again talk about society and its spiritual well-being and then literary culture. So we're stuck with A and B. So we need to make a decision between the two. So, what's the difference between A and B? Because we're looking for the best answer, not the right answer. Or the right answer is the best answer. So, every society brings to literature its own form of expression, told with greater truths and stages of literature. But this one I question because it doesn't really mention spirituality. It more talks about it is an expression, and the history of nations can be told with greater truths by this. But it's more saying that it's making the connection that you can see how a society is throughout the decades by looking at the literature, not that literature had an effect on the society itself. But A I like because it talks about the spirituality. It gives men faith and vigor. Poetry, which brings them together, gives them faith and vigor, is necessary to the people, provides them with a means of subsistence, while literature gives them desire and strength for life. I think A is the best answer here. I don't like B because it doesn't talk about the spirituality and it doesn't make the connection that a society is affected by the culture, but rather the culture affects, or it's just about literature is affected by the culture, not that literature affects the culture, and that's why B's wrong. A makes it so poetry affects the society because it gives it faith and vigor, desire, strength. So A is the correct answer for number 12. All right, number 13. So we're looking at which choice best describes the data from the table to support their suggestion. Well, let's find their suggestion. The largest T family of carnivorous dinosaurs are thought to have the strongest bites for any land animal on Earth's discovery, or history, sorry. Determining the bite force of extinct animals can be difficult, however, and paleontologists Paul Barrett and Emily Raphael suggested, all right, we found the suggestion that an estimate of dinosaur bite force may be significantly influenced by the methodology used in generating that estimate. All right, so they're questioning whether the methodology is accurate because they're saying that the amount of bite force estimated depends on the methodology used. So, therefore, if you use different methodology for the same animal, it might be different. So, let's look at the, what do you call that? Table? Yeah, table. So, study Costa et al. 2019 muscular and skeletal modeling. Okay, that's the bite force. They used tone booth interaction analysis, and that's the bite force. Mears used body mass scaling and came out with a huge bite force. And then Bates and Falkingham, muscular skeletal modeling, came out with a similar bite force. Okay, got it. So what this is showing is that the different estimation methods produce way different bite force. And we have an additional example is that this one, Bates and Falkingham and Costa al. used both muscular and skeletal modeling and actually produced the same result. So let's look at the answer choices. You have A, the study by Mears using body mass scaling produced the lowest estimated maximum bite force. Well, let's look. Mears body mass scaling. Nope, that's not true. They had the highest. So immediately, I mean, reading halfway through A, I know it's wrong because it's not true. B, in their study, G and E used tooth bone interaction analysis to produce an estimated bite force ranging a minimum of 8,000 to a maximum of 34,000 units. That doesn't support their suggestion that the methodology used influences the approximate bite force. It just talks about, I don't know, just more information that's irrelevant. The bite force estimates produced by Bates and Falkingham and by Costal were similar to each other, while the estimates produced by Mearsing, Kignac, and Erickson each differed substantially from any other estimate. Yeah, I don't love it, but it does support their claim that that the two methodologies that were the same produced the same result, and the ones that were different produced different results. So I like C. Estimated maximum bite force produced by Costa L exceeded the estimated maximum produced by Bates and Falkingham, even though both groups of researchers use the same method. No. While this is true, it does not support the claim made earlier by Barrett and Rayfields. So C is going to be our correct answer for number 13. All right, number 14. Which most effectively uses data in the table to support the researchers' team's conclusion. So let's find our conclusion. So studying tools and unearthed at a cave site in the western coast of Italy, archaeologist Paola Villa and colleagues have determined that prehistoric Neanderthal groups fashioned them from shells of clams and they harvested from the seafloor, waiting for diving, that washed up on the beach. Clam shells became thin and eroded as they washed up on the beach, while those on the seafloor are smooth and sturdy. So research team suspects that Neanderthals prized the tools made with seafloor shells. However, the team also concluded that those tools were more likely challenging to obtain, noting that. All right, so this is their claim. And the claim is Neanderthals prized the tools made with seafloor shells, but those were more challenging to obtain, noting that. So let's look at the table here. This expresses the number and origin of clamshell tools found at different levels below the surface in Neanderthal cave. So depth of tools found below surface in cave meters, 3 to 4. So the meters increase as you, well, no, they just shuffled them around. Cool. Clam shells that Neanderthals collected from the beach. So at 3 or 4 meters, it is way more clam shells. So at 6 and 7 meters, there was one clamshell found at the beach and none from the sea floor. At 4 to 5 meters, two from the beach and none at the seafloor. 2 to 3 meters, seven from the beach and none at the seafloor. In that 5 to 6 meters, you had 18 from the beach and seven from the seafloor. Well, you can see in all these cases that the amount from the seafloor is significantly less than the ones collected from the beach, and that would heavily imply that this would prove that the seafloor ones were harder to get because they had way less in them in all cases. And so I expect that to be reflected through A through D. So let's look. At each depth below the surface of the cave, the difference in the number of tools of each type suggests that the shells were easier to collect from the beach than to harvest from the sea floor. Yep. It mentions how at each depth, so all of them, the difference in the number of tools of each type, so the difference between the ones collected from the beach and the ones not, were easier to attain from the beach than to harvest from the seafloor. I really like A. I think A presents itself as a really good answer because it mentions how all of them, it shows that the number collected from the beach is way greater than the ones collected from the seafloor, implying that it's easier to get them from the beach than the seafloor. So A is good. The highest number of tools were at a depth of 3 to 14 meters below the surface, which suggests that the Neanderthal population at the site was highest during the related period of time. This has nothing to do regarding which tool was harder or easier to obtain. See, at each depth below the surface in the cave, the difference in the number of tools of each type suggests that Neanderthals preferred to use clamshells from the beach because of their durability. No, because this isn't true because they mention how, let's see. Yeah, it mentions how they were prized. So clamshells from the beach were thin and eroded, and the ones from the seafloor were smooth and sturdy and prized tools. And you can see that all right there. That means C is just not true, bad information. So we go to D. The number of tools at depths 6 meters below the surface of the cave, the depths 4 to 5, suggests that the size of clam populations changed over time. No, because that does not support the claim made over here. So A is going to be the correct answer for 14. All right, number 15. Let's look at which choice best describes the data from the table that supports the researcher's hypothesis. So we need to find their hypothesis. So, when hibernating, Alaska marmots and Arctic ground squirrels enter a state called torpor, which minimizes the energy their bodies need to function. Often, hibernating animal will temporarily come out of torpor, called an arousal episode, and its metabolic rate will rise, burning more of the precious energy the animal needs to survive the winter. Alaskan marmots hibernate in groups and therefore burn less energy, keeping warm during these episodes than they would if they were alone. A researcher hypothesized, sweet, so we finally got to the source. A researcher hypothesized that because Arctic ground squirrels hibernate alone, they would likely exhibit longer bouts of torpor and shorter arousal episodes than Alaskan marmots. Okay, cool. So, what in the table supports that? Well, let's find out. So, torpor bouts for Alaskan marmots are 12 and Arctic ground squirrels is 10.5. So, what does she say? She thinks the squirrels will have longer bouts of torpor and shorter arousal episodes. So that's what we're going to look for. So how many tour per bouts? I don't think matters. Duration per bout. There we go. So 16.77 days, 13.8 days. Does this support her claim that they would exhibit longer bouts of torpor? Yeah, because the squirrels 16 is bigger than 13. So yeah, this part supports it. And then we're going to see shorter arousal episodes. And then duration per episode, we get 14 and 21. So, yep, the data supports her hypothesis. So, let's read the answer choices. The Alaskan marmot's arousal episodes lasted 4 days, while the Arctic ground arousal episodes lasted less than a day. We're looking at their arousal episodes. That's just not true because if you look, the marmots are the 21 hours. That's not days. So A is just out because it's wrong. The Alaskan marmots and the Arctic ground squirrels both maintain torpor for several consecutive days per bout on average. No, because once again, this doesn't talk about the difference between them, and that's supporting the claim is that squirrels would have longer bouts of torpor and shorter arousal episodes than marmots, and this doesn't compare the two. C, the Alaskan marmots had shorter torpor bouts and longer arousal episodes than the Arctic ground squirrels did. Well, let's look back. Shorter torpor bouts. The Alaskan marmots did have shorter torpor bouts than the squirrels, and they did have longer arousal episodes than squirrels. So I really like C for this. The Alaskan marmots had more torpor bouts than arousal episodes, but their arousal episodes were much shorter than their torpor bouts. Once again, that's not comparing them. That's just talking about the marmots, not comparing them to the squirrels, so it can't support the researcher's hypothesis. So C is going to be the correct answer for number 15. All right, number 16. Which logically completes the text? So let's read the text. Ratified by more than 90 countries, the Nagoya Protocol is an international agreement ensuring that indigenous communities are compensated with when their agricultural resources and knowledge of wild plants are utilized by agricultural corporations. Cool. However, the protocol has shortcomings. For example, it allows corporations to insist that their agreements with communities to conduct research on the commercial uses of the community's resources and knowledge remain confidential. Therefore, some indigenous advocates express concerns that the protocol may have the unintended effect of. So it's going to be relating back to, for example, and then it's going to talk about insist that their agreements are confidential. So some indigenous advocates express concern that the protocol may have an unintended effect. Maybe they're not going to get fair compensation. Maybe that's referring to, or maybe they're going to get taken advantage of. Taken advantage of, because I don't want to be too specific here. If you can read that, taken, that's an E, advantage of. Because other people can't comment on whether their deal was fair or not. So these companies could be screwing over the indigenous populations, but whatever. Let's look at the answer choices. That's what I think. Diminishing the monetary reward that corporations might derive from their agreements with it. No. I can see how this is tricky, but it's talking about the monetary reward that corporations are going to get. They're not worried about whether the corporations are going to make enough money in this agreement. A is wrong. B, limiting the research that corporations conduct on the resources of indigenous communities, which with which they have signed agreements. No, because the reason they signed the agreement is so they can actually probably have more research with those indigenous communities. So B's out. Preventing independent observers from determining whether the agreements guarantee equitable compensation for indigenous. I like this one because that is like if I'm not allowed to see the agreement and it's not public, people can't comment whether those indigenous communities are getting screwed over by corporations or vice versa. If you're worried about the corporation. So I like C. That would be if I'm not allowed to see it, you can't comment on it, and so indigenous advocates would be concerned about that. And then you got D, discouraging indigenous communities from learning new methods. Because if they're getting paid for their methods, wouldn't they want to learn more methods? So D is just not right. So C is going to be the correct answer for 16. All right, number 17. Which choice most logically completes the text? The domestic sweet potato descends from the wild plants native to South America. It also populates the Polynesian islands, where evidence confirms that native Hawaiians and other indigenous people were cultivating the plant for centuries before seafaring first occurred over the thousands of miles of ocean separating them from South America. Okay, so what it's saying is that sweet potato is domestic to South America, but native Hawaiians and indigenous peoples were growing the plant well before people were able to sail over to them. So, to explain how the sweet potato was first introduced to Polynesia, botanist Pablo Rodriguez and colleagues analyzed the DNA of numerous varieties of the plant, concluding that the Polynesian varieties diverged from South America ones over 100,000 years ago. Given that Polynesia was populated only in the last 3,000 years, the team concluded that I bet you that it was once part of South America. So Polynesia was once part of South America. That's what I'm thinking, like in Pangaea, etc. But the cultivation of the sweet potato in Polynesia likely predates its cultivation in South America. I don't think that's true because, yeah, Polynesia only existed the last 3 years or 3,000 years. So I don't think that's true. Polynesian people likely acquired the sweet potato from South American people only within the last 3,000 years. No, because it's mentioned how it's existed for over 100,000 years. Human activity likely played no role in the introduction of the sweet potato. Yes, I like that one because it just makes no sense. Like, if it diverged 100,000 years ago, but people have only been around for 3,000 years and they've never met each other, then how did they get the sweet potato? It probably didn't involve people at all. Like, that's a pretty solid assumption. Polynesian sweet potato varieties likely descended from a single South American variety, which was domesticated, not wild. I also don't like that one. I liked that one all the way up until it said it was domesticated, not wild, because once again, this implies people had something to do with it before it split, but it likely split well before the human populations came around, and so C is going to be the correct answer for 17. All right, 18. So we've gotten to the grammar questions. How exciting. Atoms in a synchrotron, a type of circular particle accelerator, travel faster and faster until they blank a desired energy level, at which point they are diverted to collide with a target, smashing the atom. So we're going to look at how to use reach in this. Atoms in a synchrotron, a type of circular particle, travel. So looks like it's present. Travel faster until they reach. Yeah, I think just sounding it out loud in my head or out loud to you guys. Reach fits. a desired energy level, at which point they are diverted to collide with the target, smashing the items. Yeah, so it's atoms plural. So it makes sense that you would use reach. So if you just put the subject atoms reach, just back to back, makes sense. So I like B. And it also fits with the conventions of travel because it's heavily implied. Like if they use a verb right before they use another one, it's going to be in the same tense. And then it would make sense that they are diverted to keeping it into that present tense. So B is going to be the correct answer. It doesn't really make sense for C. That's past. That's speaking into the future. And until they are reaching a desired energy level, doesn't really make sense if you read it out loud. So B is going to be the correct answer for 18. All right, number 19. It's going to be another grammar question. So even though bats prefer very sweet nectar, the plants that attract them have evolved to produce nectar that is only moderately sweet. A recent study blank why. So we're going to put explains here. Oh, see? Just read it out loud in your head and it's going to give you a pretty good direction for which answer choice it's going to be. So a recent study explains why. That's how my brain reads it, but once again, looking at all these answer choices, this is going to be a non-finite versus finite question. And these I've been seeing repeat. So this is going to be your non or your finite. Sorry, this is your finite. And the rest of these are non-finite. Let me clean this up a little bit. So once again, this is the finite. These all are non-finite. And once again, the big hint for this question is that if you can tell these are all non-finite, then it's probably going to be the only one that separates itself. So it's going to be the finite. And you can do that by, once again, you know it's a non-finite if you can start a sentence with it. So you can say, explaining the text, the author says, or having explained the text, the author does this, or to explain the text, the author writes it out. But you can't say, explains the text, the author. Doesn't that just sound funny? That's because it's a finite, and these are non-finite. And so you can tell by the ing, having, explain, explaining, to explain. And if you want to break it down a little further, this is a main clause. A recent study explained why. Boom. That sentence can stand on its own, so therefore, main clause. And so the subject, so in order to have a main clause, once again, I'm going to clean this up. I don't have a ton of space. So if you're going to have a main clause, you're going to have a subject, and you're going to need to use a verb, and that verb is going to have to be a non-finite verb, or finite, sorry, finite verb here. And the subject is recent study, and then the finite verb is going to be explains. And this is a rule. So this is a rule. So to make a main clause, you need a subject with a finite verb following it. And that's why the answer choice is A. So that is probably 3 different reasons why it is answer choice A. I hope that helped. Sounded a little convoluted, but there you go. Number 20. It's going to be testing our grammar over here and looking at the answer choices. I can immediately see that have, were, outline. It's going to be plural versus singular. And what is it? Verbs. And you can do that because to find whether it's plural or singular, you can put they or you can put it. So if you put it, you're testing for singular. If you put they, it's plural. So they here. Put they have outlined, then it's plural. They were outlining, then it's plural. They outlines. Well, that doesn't sound right. It outlines makes a lot more sense. So this is actually the singular one. We found it. And they outline. So this is plural, plural, plural. And once again, with these grammar ones, if you wanted to go super fast, you could just look at it. So I'm going to bet you it's answer choice C because it's the only one that's singular compared to 3 plurals. But once again, we can read the sentence. You can kind of ignore former First Lady, United States Eleanor Roosevelt, Indian activist, instrumental in drafting a document that blank the basic freedom. So it's referring to a document that And we're going to have to put a singular because it's a document is one document. And that's why we're going to put outlines here because that is a singular verb right after the, the subject is a documents. But if you said documents that outline, but no, it's a document that outlines. So it's going to be C for 20. All right, 21. It's going to be testing our grammar. So let's look. We're going to see whether we need a colon, period, semicolon, and comma. So the lifespan of a rockfish vary greatly by species. For instance, the colorful calico rockfish can survive for little over a decade, while the rough-eye rockfish boasts a maximum lifespan of about 2 centuries. Dang, good for the rough-eye, like so good for the rough-eye rockfish. Dang, can't speak today. So immediately I can see that's a main clause, and that this is while. Put the while there. While the rough-eye rockfish, this is going to be what you call a subordinate clause. So we're just going to put sub C. And if you have a main clause followed by a subordinate clause, you need punctuation there and you need a comma. So we actually know it's going to be a comma. If you know that rule, you can already see that it's D. And it's not any of these other ones because it's not going to be a semicolon because you have this while there. And you know it's a main clause because this can stand by itself. You could end with a little over a decade period. But while the rough-eye rockfish boasts a maximum lifespan about 2 centuries, that sentence, this part to this part, can't stand on its own. That's why it's the subordinate clause. And so since it can't stand on its own, you're not allowed you can't put a colon there and you can't put a period there. And this while, because the while's there, you can't put a semicolon there. And D is the only correct answer. You need a comma separating a main clause and a subordinate clause. And once again, main clause can stand on its own, and a subordinate clause cannot stand on its own. All right, 22. It's going to be another grammar question. So the line light system developed by Kenyan inventor Richard Turner consists of LED lights installed around the perimeter of livestock pastures. We can kind of ignore this. Powered with energy collected by solar panels during the day, the blinking LEDs keep lions away at night, thus protecting the livestock without risking harm to the endangered lions. Sweet. So immediately I see a subordinate clause and a main clause. And once again, the subordinate clause is going to be the powered with energy collected by solar panels during the day. That's all one clause. And then the main clause is going to be the blinking LEDs keep lions away at night, thus protecting. Because if you know the difference between a main clause and a subordinate clause is that the main clause can stand by itself. Once again, you can read it as the blinking light LEDs keep lions away at night, thus protecting livestock without risking harm to endangered life. Boom. That sentence makes sense. But if you say powered with energy collected by solar panels during the day, and you ended that sentence, it wouldn't make sense. And that's how you know it's a subordinate clause than a main clause. And what do you need separating a subordinate clause and a main clause? It's going to be a comma. So immediately I know A and B are out because there's no punctuation here. And so all we need to know is C and D. And I can say powered with energy collected by solar panels during the day. You don't need a comma there. This results in a comma splice. And so C is going to be the correct answer. All right, number 23. So it's going to be another grammar question, and let's read it. Materials scientist MAC and her colleagues believe that they could improve on the multi-component alloy equal proportions, mixture of nickel, cobalt, chromium, and replace chromium with ruthenium, and it's going to be Ru. The alloy that resulted, nickel Ru, turned out to be an unsuitable replacement for nickel whatever. Okay, so immediately I see that this is a main clause, and it's separating a main clause because you can say you could read this beginning to Ru would be one main clause because it's a sentence that can stand on its own. So you say material scientists, her colleagues believe they can improve the alloy equal proportions of nickel, cobalt, chromium, replacing chromium with ruthenium. And then you could put a period and you could say the alloy that resulted turned out to be unsuitable replacement. So this is also a main clause. So we have a main clause and a main clause. And what do you do to separate them? Well, you need punctuation. So immediately I'm going to say A is out. To separate main clauses, you can't use a comma. That's for subordinate clauses in a main clause, you can use a comma, but not main clause to main clause. So you need B or D. And I'm going to say D is the correct answer because when you're using a but, and but is fancy for coordinating conjunction, you need a comma between main clauses. So you need a comma and a but to separate these two main clauses. So D is going to be the correct answer, and that's why B is wrong. And D is the correct answer for number 23. All right, number 24. Number 24 is testing our grammar. And looking at the answer choices, I can see that it's a plural slash singular verb question. And if I was going very, very fast, I would immediately choose A as the correct answer because I can see that if you put I in front of all of these, I was, I were, I are, I have been, you can tell that these three are plural. This is the only one that's singular. And you can do another test saying they was, they were, they are, they have been. You can see what's plural and singular as well, switching that up. But let's look at the question and make sure that that's correct. Among the club's leaders, blank Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, founder of the Women's Heiress Club of Boston. Immediately, I think among the club's leaders, blank Josephine, I think this is the subject. We're not talking about the leaders, we're talking about among them was Josephine, and that's singular because we're only talking about her. So I know A is going to be the correct answer because was is the only singular verb there. So, yep, that's why A is the answer to 24. All right, number 25. Looks like it's going to be testing our grammar again. So let's look. Based on genetic evidence, archaeologists have generally agreed that reindeer domestication began in the 11th century CE. Okay. However, since uncovering fragments of a 2,000-year-old reindeer training harness in northern Siberia, researcher or Robert Lossie made an argument that may have begun much earlier. Sweet. So what they're trying to do here is I see that since uncovering fragments of a 2,000-year-old reindeer training harness in northern Siberia, we need to find the subject that's going to relate to the sentence before it. We need to figure out who found the uncovering fragments of a 2,000-year-old reindeer training harness. Like since uncovering the 2000 training harness, who did? That's got to be what's following it. So let's look at the answer choices. A looks good. So you'd say researcher Robert Lossie has argued that domestication, because saying it like in northern Siberia, researcher Robert Loss has argued that domestication. This makes Robert Lossie the subject of the sentence before it. So since uncovering the fragments of a 2,000-year-old reindeer training harness, researcher Robert Lossie has argued. We're saying that researcher Robert Lossie is the one who found the training harness. This checks out. I like A. We have B. Researcher Robert Lossie's argument is that, see, this is what I mean. This is now implying that it was her argument that found the training harness, which makes no sense because this since uncovering the training harness, her argument is that. So it's not her argument that found the training harness, it is researcher Robert Lossie that did it. And then you could say reindeer training harness in northern Siberia, domestication. Research Robert Lossie has argued that doesn't make any sense if you read it out loud in your head. It's illogical. And then you got D, the argument researcher Robert Lossie has made is that, once again, this implies that it's the argument that she has made that found the reindeer harness. So D's out, and A is going to be the only answer choice left. Okay, number 26. So it looks like it's going to be testing our grammar. So let's read it out loud. Hegra is an archaeologist site in present-day Saudi Arabia and was the second largest of the End Kingdom, 4th century BCE to 1st century. Okay, we got a period here, so this is where we're going to be focusing. Archaeologist Laila recently traveled to Hegra to study its ancient tombs. Built into the rocky outer outcrops of the vast desert, these burial chambers seem to blend seamlessly with nature. So immediately I can see that right here. So if you put tombs here and then built here, so T and B, Both of those sentences can stand on their own. So we can say archaeologist Layla recently traveled to Hector to study its ancient tombs, period, or whatever punctuation we're going to use. Built into the rocky outcrops of the vast desert, these burial chambers seem to blend seamlessly with nature. So both of these can stand on their own. So just main clause, main clause. We need punctuation in between, but you can't use a comma because that would be a comma splice. You can do that for subjunctive clause in the main clause, but not two main clauses. Or in this case, there's sentences, which very little difference, I think, for in terms of SAT. You should just think of them as different clauses. I know you can't. You have to have punctuation. You definitely can't have D, and then we can put and. And so, when looking at and, you can say archaeologist Layla recently traveled to Hegra to study its ancient tombs and built into the rocky outcrops of the vast desert. That doesn't make any sense. You can't use and that way to separate these two main clauses. It isn't. It's illogical. So you know you're going to have a period. So that's why it's answer choice A to separate two main clauses. A period can be used, and so that's why A is the correct answer for 26. All right, 27. So looking at it, it's just going to test our use of the comma. Yep, let's go read it. I'm just going to skip no, I'm going to read it. I think it provides good information. When external forces are applied to common glass made from silicates, energy builds up around the minuscule defects in the material, resulting in fractures. Recently, engineer Erika Frankberg of Tampere University in Finland used the chemical compound aluminum oxide to make a glassy solid that can withstand higher strain than silicate glass before fracturing. Okay, so we need to know whether we're going to put a comma around compound and aluminum oxide. So recently, engineer Erika Frankberg of Tampere University in Finland used the chemical compound aluminum oxide to make a glassy solid. I know it's not going to be this because there's no separating. Recently, Erika Frankberg of Tampere University in Finland used the chemical compound aluminum oxide to make glass. Like you're not just going to put one comma there. And so I think B is out on the same way because no punctuation is needed to separate temporary university using compound aluminum oxide to make a glassy solid echoing. Like it's all one sentence. Like you're not separating any clauses or subjunctive clauses. It's really just one main clause. And so punctuation right here and here is unnecessary. So really we only need to know whether C and D are correct because we need to know whether to include aluminum oxide or well, it's going to get included. We just need to know whether to put commas around it. And so, kind of the rule of thumb with commas is commas go outside info that's not needed. What I mean by that is not necessary for the sentence to function. So in this case, we have temporary university in Finland use the chemical compound aluminum oxide to make a glassy solid that can withstand a higher strain. I would say that information is needed. Like you need to tell me it's aluminum oxide because nowhere in the beginning of the paragraph do they mention what the chemical compound is. You can't say use the chemical compound to make a glassy solid because we don't know what the chemical compound is. It is a necessary bit of information to say that it is aluminum oxide, and that's why D is correct because putting the commas here and here implies that the aluminum oxide is not necessary information in the passage, but it is. And so that's why C is out and D is the correct answer. All right, number 28. Which choice completes the text with the most logical? Okay, we're working on the transitions. So let's read the text. Etched into Peru's Nazca Desert are line drawings so large that they can only be fully seen from high above. Archaeologists have known of these lines since the 1920s, when a researcher spotted some from a nearby foothill, and they have been studying the markings ever since. Blank archaeologists' efforts are aided by drones that capture high resolution aerial photographs of the lines. All right, so already right off the bat, I like to see because it's talking about something they can only do currently, which is obviously use drones, and it looks like it's a comparison to what they used to do in the past. So they used to study because they could see it in the foothill in the 1920s, and nowadays we can use drones to look at them. So I really like A as a logical transition. In comparison, I don't like that one because I don't think the purpose of this following sentence is to compare. Like in comparison, archaeologists' efforts are aided by drones. Yeah, because it also doesn't mention that in the change in timeline. So we need a transition that mentions that in the 1920s you did this, but archaeologists' efforts are aided by drones. Because without that currently saying that this is happening now, not in the 1920s, it implies that in the 1920s they had drones, which is not true. So still, archaeologists' efforts are aided by drones. No, because still archaeologists' efforts are aided by drones. No, because it implies that in the 1920s, using foothills would imply that they wouldn't be able to use drones now, which is not true. And the same thing with however archaeologists' efforts are aided by drones. Once again, that implies like in spite. So, in spite of archaeologists using foothills, we use drones. Makes no sense. A definitely is the correct answer here. All right, number 29. We're looking at the logical transition here, so let's read it. Archaeologist Sue Brunning explains why the 7th century ship burial site at Sutton Hoo in England was likely the tomb of a king. First, the gold artifacts inside the ship suggest that the person buried with them was a wealthy and a respected leader. Okay. Blank, the massive effort required to bury the ship would likely only have been undertaken for a king. All right, so let's look. Instead, the massive effort required to bury the ship would likely have been undertaking the king. No, because that's implying that this sentence is alternative to the previous information. So that's not true because I think it's just elaborating on the fact like first the gold artifacts were buried wealthy, made him a wealthy, respected leader. Instead, the massive effort required would have been undertaken for a king. No, because these are the same ideas, just two different examples, and instead would imply that this would mean something different, which it doesn't. So A's out. And then still, the massive effort required to bury the ship would have likely been undertaken for a king. That's not true because that implies like in spite or something different than the previous sentence. And then this sentence is just agreeing with the sentence before it. So still's out. Specifically, the massive effort required to bury the ship would likely only have been undertaken for a king. I can see I can see that. I'm giving it an iffy. First, the gold artifacts inside the ship suggest the person who was buried with them was wealthy, respected leader. Specifically, the massive effort. I don't like specifically because specifically would assume that the sentence after it would be kind of given more information about the sentence before it, but that's not true. The sentence before it was really talking about what they were buried with, and the second one's talking about the effort to bury the ship as a whole. It's not really expanding on that sentence because it's not talking about the items they were buried with. And then second, okay, yeah, second looks a lot better because once again, this has first here, and it's a big hint that second would follow, and that it's information that's in the list. So first, they were buried with the wealthy stuff. Second, in order to bury a ship, that would have been only an undertaking for a king. So it's adding on to the list of why the burial site was likely for a king. So D is the correct answer, and C is out because it doesn't expand on this sentence. It doesn't give specifics about it. It more introduces a new idea that continues the list. So second is the best answer choice. So D for 29. All right, number 30. We need to find the logical transition here. So let's look. The more diverse and wide ranging an animal's behaviors, the larger and more energy demanding the animal's brain needs to tend to be. Blank, from an evolutionary perspective, animals that perform only basic actions should allocate fewer resources to growing and maintaining brain tissue. The specialized subtypes of ants within colonies provide an opportunity to explore this hypothesis. So, what do we got? So, we got subsequently. So the more diverse and wide-ranging an animal's behaviors, the larger their brain should be. I mean, from here, I this talks about that smarter you are, the bigger your brain, and the more energy that needs to go to it. It's the claim being made here. And then it says, so if you do very few actions, you don't need big brain, and you don't need resources for that brain. So that's what's happening here. So these sentences are connected. So it's kind of like saying the more the bigger your brain, the more behaviors you do. That's why you need more food. Therefore, if you don't do many different things, you need a smaller brain. So therefore, you need less energy going to that brain. Okay, so let's read. So subsequently, I don't like subsequently because it implies that like first this happened, then this happened. So like it was a series of events, which it's not. It's more like this is like what should go here would be like therefore. Oh, what the heck? What the heck? Go back. Like therefore. And then besides, I don't like that because that's saying, what is it implying? It's kind of implying that it's just adding more information, which I don't think is true. I think it's one of those things where because they said because they make this claim, it's like therefore this claim, it's not listing information. Nevertheless, no, because nevertheless implies that this sentence is true in spite of the preceding one or the one before it. And honestly, after seeing thus, I think this is the right answer because this is very close to therefore, which I mean, I just naturally think should have gone in there. And it implies that basically this sentence, so we say big brain means more actions, which means more food for the brain, but therefore or thus, from an evolutionary perspective, animals that do less things need smaller brain, therefore they don't need resources to allocate towards brain tissue or keeping a big brain. There's a cause and effect here, and that's why thus is the best answer. None of the rest of these imply a cause and effect, just more, or I guess nevertheless does, but that's for a negative one. But D is the correct answer for 30. That's what I'm trying to get at. Number 31. When designing costumes for film, American artists typically custom fits the garments to each actor. Okay, so she makes tight clothes. For the film Sunshine, in which astronauts must reignite a dying sun, she designed a golden spacesuit that had factory reproduced it in a few standard sizes, lacking the tailor-made quality, and the final creations reflected the eugenelessness of actual spacesuits. Sweet, so she did the opposite. So basically it's saying she usually tailors it, but for this one, she didn't. So what transition would make it so these ideas could be accurately represented? We could say nevertheless, and huh, yeah, nevertheless for film Sunshine. So that implies that nevertheless signals that hmm, how do I say this? That it's an exception to what she usually does. So nevertheless, like in spite of the fact that she usually tailors it, she didn't. Or she usually tailors it. Nevertheless, for this one, she did not tailor it. It basically shows that there's a difference between the ideas, or it might be a little contradictory, or it's an exception to the original idea. So I really like nevertheless because that's what's happening here. She usually tailors them, but it's saying that she didn't here. And so you would say nevertheless. That would work there. And then thus, I don't like thus. Thus implies because she usually tailors them, she didn't, or like it's expanding upon this idea, further proving it, which it doesn't, because she tailors them, and then, but for this one, she didn't. That's not a proper use of thus. Likewise, no, because once again, that implies that it's going to be similar to because she tailored them. Likewise, would imply that this sentence would talk about how she tailors more suits because it's similar to the previous one, which is not what's happening. So likewise is out. And then that's the same with moreover. Moreover signals that the information in the sentence adds to the previous information, which it doesn't because the previous information is the fact she tailors them. And the next information, it's here's an example of her not tailoring them or doesn't tailor them. And so, nevertheless, is the only one that achieves this logically. So, A is the correct answer for 31. All right, 33. While researching a topic, a student has taken the following notes. Well, let's read the question before we dig into the bullet points. The student wants to emphasize Similarity between the two books by Shantan. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the. Okay, so his goal is to emphasize how similar the books are. So that's what we're going to look for. Shantan is an Australian author. In 2008, he published Tales from Outer Suburbia, a book of 15 short stories. The stories describe surreal events occurring in otherwise ordinary suburban neighborhoods. Now he's published Tales from the Inner City, a book of 25 short stories. So what do they have similar? They're both short stories. The stories describe surreal events occurring in otherwise ordinary urban settings. So they both describe surreal events in otherwise ordinary. So the only difference is that it's suburban and urban. The rest of it is the same. So let's look for that and the answers. Shantan's book, Tales from Outer Suburbia, which describes surreal events occurring in otherwise ordinary places, contains fewer short. Nope, this is how they're different because it mentions fewer short stories. We want to know why they're similar. B, Tales from Outer Suburbia was published in 2008. Nope, this is difference because this is just when they were published and how different that is. So B's out. C, unlike Tales from the Inner City, Chantuan's book from Tales of the Outer Suburbia said, nope, this is again how different they are. He wants to emphasize how similar they are. So we're left with D, but I haven't even read it. Shantan's books, Tales from Outer Suburbia and Tales from Inner City, both describe surreal events occurring otherwise. Yep, this mentions how they're similar and it's accurate, so D is going to be the correct answer for 32. All right, number 33. So a student wants to emphasize the aim of the research study. So what is the aim of the research study, which basically rephrased as why is he doing the research study? What is he trying to find out? And now he wants to emphasize that. So let's read it. The factors that affect clutch size, the number of eggs laid at one time, have been well studied in birds but not lizards. Cool. A team led by Tel Aviv University investigated which factors influence lizard clutch size. Their team obtained clutch size and habitat data for over 39,000 lizard species and analyzed the data with statistical models. So this is the methodology. This is what and who. And maybe this is the aim? I don't know. Let's read. Larger clutch size was associated with environments in higher latitudes that have more seasonal change. Lizards in higher latitude environments may lay larger clutch sizes to take advantage for shorter windows of favorable conditions. So looking at this, I'm trying to figure out what the aim of the study is. I think we're going to have to infer it. I think we're going to see that they're looking for the aim of the study is to see clutch size, and maybe we have to infer that the clutch size was associated. They're trying to figure out whether high latitudes affect clutch size in eggs and lizards. And maybe that's the aim. Maybe we just have to infer it. But let's look at the answer choices and then maybe we can piece it together after looking at those. Researchers wanted to know which factors influence lizard egg clutch size because factors have been well studied in birds. Maybe. I'm not loving it, but could be. Because the reason I think it could be is because this would be a name. They want to know which factors influence lizard egg clutch size, and then they're just adding that. Maybe it's because it's been studied in birds, not lizards. B. After they obtained data over 3,900 lizard species, researchers determined that the larger clutch size was associated with it. This is the findings, not the aim. I'm going to take that out. C. We now know that lizards in higher latitude environments may lay larger clutch sizes take advantages. Nope, because that's the findings. Ah, I see. That's my mistake up here. These were the findings. I just didn't realize that. So we're going to be looking for this, which makes A seem way more plausible. D, researchers obtained clutch size and habitat data for over 3,900 lizard species. This is once again the methodology. So A is going to be the correct answer. That's my fault. I didn't realize that these were the conclusions and findings of the research study and that this was the aim here. And so A is the correct answer.